Ever wonder how a basic 3D model like this can be transformed into something like this? Well, in this video, I want to show you a step-by-step process on how you can achieve this using a 3D kit. Stay tuned. Now, before we dive into the process of this, I want to show you sort of the before and after, right? So we started with this into this as the final image. Now, before I go into the technical side of the 3D things and all that, I want to share with you guys that we at Absorb 3D, we are going to run a contest this month of July. Now, the rules are very simple. We are actually giving away a sample kit of our Asian Medieval pack. And if you haven't seen that, this is our actual Asian Medieval 3D pack that we have in our store. We're actually giving away a sample version, which is this, which is also going to include this new building that I made for this particular tutorial. But you can download this for free, whether you participate in the contest or not. This is just for you to have a sample of it. Now, if you decide to join on the contest, you get a sample kit. The rules are very simple. You can only use the pieces that are in the kit, and you have to be in our Discord community in order to post the image that you make, which is something like this, right? But your own design, of course. And so I wanted to do a very simple tutorial on how I would tackle this for you guys to have at least something to go off if you would like. And we're gonna give some pretty cool prizes. You know, we're about to release a new kit. For the first prize they're gonna have that key for completely for free, the whole kit. Second prize is gonna get a mini kit similar to the medieval one, but for the new one. And third prize is gonna get some single assets of the new release. And anybody that participates will get a discount on our store as well. We have 3D models. We also have references, packs, and all that. But the deadline is gonna be July 30th on our Discord community channel. I'll post all the links in the description below just so you can have it, so you can download the kit and and to join the Discord if you would like to participate as well. Now, again, the mini kit, the reason why we make our kits this way is that, yes, we do have, all these buildings already made up and all these pieces that you can pretty much use them as pieces to construct your own scene. But I personally like to have pieces that are a little bit more simple, like the ones that you see here in the front rows, because I still want to have freedom in order for me to build something from scratch, right? I don't want to depend on everything that just 100% on what's in the kit itself. And so, for example, you can see that this new building has a little bit of a different design language on the building itself, because most of the buildings that you see here are sort of like square and they have these angles. And so I wanted to create something a little bit different. And I want to show that you could actually do that by using these very basic pieces, right? And so you're actually saving a lot of time because you don't have to create the pieces from scratch. And you will see on the tutorial, this video, that how I use them to create new parts and sort of fit them to whatever idea it is that I want to create. Now, every time I start anything environment related, right, I always want to start based on a human scale, especially if I'm doing anything that is architectural or anything that is man-made. I always want to start that because it's going to help me later to not worry about the scale of the details and materials and all that. And you can see that every time I want to work a new sort of building or architectural feature, I always go with a very basic model like the one that you're seeing here. Now, originally, I sort of knew the sort of shape that I wanted before I started here. So I went right to it and started building the general shape and scale of this actual building. I knew I wanted something round. I knew I wanted maybe a couple tiers or levels to it, right? And so that's sort of how I started this. And you can see that, I copied the mini kit that you guys are getting into my scene because it's a fairly small kit, so I can deal with it. And I'm starting to add things here that I know for a fact I want to have in here. I'm using the power right now of modifiers with the array and the simple deform bend in order for me to create this roof that I want to have in here. I wasn't sure about the which type, if I wanted the wood one or the tile one, right in here. Maybe a combination of both will be the ideal situation here. But you can see how very simple and easy a very simple asset like that roof could be turned into a pretty good piece of the puzzle for this thing. And you're gonna see that I use this technique of the array and the bend quite a lot. And one is because of the nature of the building, right? So I know that things are going to go around the shape that I already have built in the base model. But this, this process here of using the singular pieces, the individual pieces, in order for you to create something bigger and bigger, I think is super powerful because it gives you actually one, you don't depend on what the kit provides you in terms of like the big things, and you can actually get back some of the creativity of building something new based on the little pieces that you're putting together and that you're using. And so this sort of wall thing that I'm creating now is really a new 100% new asset, right? That I'm sort of building, and I'm sort of skipping a lot of the technicalities of building all these little pieces, even though they're quite simple to build. But I'm trying to save as much time as possible in order for me to um, mostly concentrate on the creation part of this, right? And I also use this time, which is another aspect of this that I really like, is to actually conceptualize what I'm building. Right, I'm not making any sketches or prior sketches, or not really having a complete plan when I do these sort of assets. I sort of start putting them together and thinking, okay, if I were to actually construct this in real life and I had all these ingredients and all these pieces, how would I do that and what would I make? And so you're gonna see me that I jump around between a couple different ideas, and this happens quite often. But this process is actually fairly fast. I went from having nothing on the canvas or the model, right, to this whole thing took me about 2 hours from zero to complete finish in the Photoshop final image, which is what you saw at the beginning of the video. So only 2 hours to do that whole process. Probably about an hour and a half in the 3D part, because I wanted to build the whole building, and about 20 to 30 minutes just on the Photoshop part of it, in order to finish the details and add some uh, details that I couldn't add in the 3D. And so the process itself of this is fairly fast. And if you can do this right, you are able to create a bunch of new things and even recycle old models in order to create something new. And that's one of the main reasons why I think kit bashing in 3D is so powerful. And so you can see that I created sort of like a section of the wall that I knew I was gonna repeat throughout the circular part of the building. And once I get that section, I can do the same technique that I did for the roof, which is just doing an array and bending that over 360 degrees, and I'll get the full building on this section here. And so a lot of these techniques are extremely simple, right? They're not very advanced techniques or tools that I'm using here on Blender. They're just very simple. It's just trying to use them as best as possible. Now, I'm already starting to think about, okay, what am I going to do with the lighting here? And just so I can start visualizing the level of detail that I'm getting from this. And you can see that by just doing that little section, like I'm getting quite a lot of detail into this model, right? And another thing of why, another reason why this process is so powerful. And you can see that at the bottom right, I always set up my camera, especially if I'm doing like callouts and buildings like this for concept that I need to showcase the actual design of it. I have a camera, and you're gonna see in a little bit that I sort of set it up in a way that I know that's the shot that I'm gonna be using for the final concept. And I do that because it helps me if it's just for a concept. I'm not doing like a whole thing of a scene or anything like that where I'm gonna move around. I set up everything based on what I see on the camera, and I always try to think about if I were to actually build this, like how, what are the details and things that I would add here. So I would have here sort of like a wooden frame for this sort of tower that I'm trying to build in here that will help the transition from the tiles of the roof tiles to the actual cylindrical wall of this tower. And right now I'm trying to make the roof of the building of the first tier a little bit, just a little bit bigger, a little bit longer than the roof at the top, just so I could have a little bit of a difference of scale and and pieces into this, a little bit of variation. And one of the things that you can notice is that that second tier, that second floor, is sort of shorter than the first floor. And so I do that intentionally in order to bring a little bit of variation to the scale of these things, right? If I make them all the same, it's gonna look a little bit more boring than if I didn't, right? So I'm trying to play with the scale, the ratio of how things are laid out, and in that way I can sort of think about the details and how this thing is going to look in the final. And one of the things that you could do is like, yes, you can grab all these assets and sort of combine them like the way they are, but you can actually grab assets that are made of even more simple singular assets and actually break those up and use those pieces to combine them with other pieces that you took from a different one and actually create something even more different or completely new. And so there is a lot of room, and you can see that I'm sort of creating now sort of like a little sign, wooden sign, using this graphic here, just by combining a couple of the 4x4 pieces of wood with the lettering and some of the text here. But sort of creating like a little a sign that I can put around and edit and all that. And you know the techniques remain the same, right? I think it's just adding more layers and more layers of this architecture. Again, I want to have a layering of things, right? When I have a wall, I just don't have a hole and just a window in that hole, right? I have a frame, I have a frame for the actual window, then the window, and then the things inside the window. And there's all this layering that I need to create in order for the piece or the piece of architecture to look believable and realistic. And I don't mean realistic in terms of the rendering, right, or the textures. What I mean by realistic is that when people see it, they should have that feeling of, oh yeah, this, I could actually see this in real life, in terms of like, how things are working and the layering of things, because that's what actually happens in real life. And so as I construct this thing, I'm thinking about all those things that I need to try and add to make that look the way it looks. And so having a kit also helps me because, when I'm creating the smaller pieces or combining pieces, I only need to concentrate on something that small. I don't need to worry about the whole building as a whole. I'm actually thinking about, how this window is sort of set up into this hole, or how this support beam gets constructed or placed under this roof in order to provide support of weight, and I'm thinking about all those things when I'm creating all these pieces. And so when I go into building bigger things and bigger buildings and all that train of thought is actually already into the assets. And so it's really just a matter of me of how I'm going to combine them in order to create something new. And so I don't have to I don't have to worry about that as much later on. But at the beginning, as I'm putting all these pieces together, I need to think of it in that way. And so I'm also breaking up a little bit of the silhouette with designs and some of the things that I'm gonna be adding into here, just so it brings a little bit of variation into the piece itself. And I'm already thinking about, the camera angle, the things that I'm gonna have, where the light is gonna be coming from, and all that. And also the great thing about having a 3D is you have all these pieces made that you can actually explore more ideas because the pieces are already made, and so you don't have to worry about spending too much time building, like actually building a piece in order to test if it's going to work or not. And so all these pieces are already made that you can just really just put it there, see how it looks. If it works, then you can keep it. If it doesn't, then you can just delete it itself. And so I'm thinking that maybe on this roof I can add another tier layer of a roof, trying to break up that big sort of silhouette at the top. And when I think about these problems, I sort of make a mental note about it. I don't need to address it right away, because sometimes I don't have the answer, and so I can quickly move on into something else that I know I can do, that I have an answer for, and start constructing it that way. So right now I'm sort of thinking about the first floor walls that I'm going to be creating, the entrance and all that, and doing the same process that I did for the top, but of course thinking of it as in the first floor, right? So I need to have some sort of like a double door system, maybe, or a single door, however you want to, and sort of start building some incorporating some windows and structural items that I know I can array and duplicate and move around and all that. And so I want to create this layering of all these different functional things that are in the space in order for me to build up. And again, I build it up flat like this, and once I have it, then I can worry about bending it and put it on the actual model itself, like you see here. Now, in this particular case, I'm not gonna really array this all around because I don't want to have too many doors. I want to have a front door and then maybe some windows on the side. And so I'm gonna duplicate that same sort of process, but for the sides here, and add those to the model. Now you're gonna see, you're also going to notice that this is mostly a sort of repeatable process, right? You sort of rinse and repeat the same sort of process, and you keep pushing and pushing it. But it's really all it takes is just sticking to that process and continue to build up on top of what you had already, and thinking of ways that maybe you can push the architecture or push the functionality of the things that you are building. And most of the time nowadays, when I do something like this, I actually do put myself a time limit, just because I know what I can do in, let's say, an hour or 2 hours, right? And so in this case, I didn't want to spend over 2 hours in this whole thing. And so I have maybe like an hour, and I want to have on the 3D side of things, because I know that's what's going to take me the longest. And then probably like 20 to 30 minutes on the Photoshop side of things, because these models have quite a lot of information that when we make the render, which you will see in a little bit later on, the render itself has quite a lot of information, right? So we don't really need to do a lot. We just need to do a couple of things in order to enhance the image itself. But the models have quite a lot of information. So the models, if you have models that have less information, that means you're gonna have to spend more time in the 2D or the 3D, just enhancing the models themselves. But these models are pretty detailed and are good enough in order for me to get me to where I want to from the actual render. And so you see me here adding the third tier, and you can see that it has even a shorter height comparison to the second one, and that way it creates this sort of like hierarchy into the structure itself, right? Maybe this place is not really a whole floor. Maybe it's just a feature on the building that maybe lets air in or light or something like that. And so I get to a stage where I can just really start working on the lighting, right? I'm thinking about how I can best use the lighting to my advantage in order for me to portray the concept. This is considered more of a concept type of piece. It's not really an illustration or anything like that. And so I want to use the lighting to my advantage in order to portray that. I'm not thinking about adding fog or adding effects or anything like that, right? One version could be maybe like at nighttime where I could actually see the lights in action. Maybe I can see some interior light coming through the windows and door, so we can see how this place looks like during nighttime. But in this case, I went for the daytime, just to kind of showcase the architecture. And one thing that I like to do, especially for concepts like this, where it's just like a singular asset, or I'm trying to showcase a particular design for the camera, I set it up into like a high millimeter, maybe like a 50 or 150 millimeter. 19 is usually what I use for like scenes, but for concepts like this, I like to have a little bit more of a flatter look in order for me to not really push the perspective into some of these things. I still want to see some perspective, but having something like that where it gets too pushed, it tends to break up or not showcase the design too well. And so lately I've just been using maybe 150 millimeter into these in order for me to showcase these. And you can see that I changed the lighting here because it was getting to I was thinking more into the illustrative side of things, which is something that I'm trying to avoid. And so I went with a more basic sort of daytime sort of lighting. And I'm using these extra lights, coming from the bottom in order for me to create some bounce light or enhance the bounce light from the floor into the structure coming up. And so you can get this sort of effect with cycles, and I'm using cycles at this moment. But sometimes it needs like a little push in order for you to get it pretty consistent with that. And so you're gonna see me that I add all these lights pointing up in order for me to sort of fake the bounce light effect. Right now, the lighting here, the sun is actually pretty bright, and you can see that I'm adding this class system, and I'm setting up this building in front of in the center of the world, and so I can use the cursor as a pivot for me to duplicate things along the edge of the building instead of trying to do it manually. And so I'm changing the pivot to the cursor for me to be able to do that. But the lighting here is pretty bright, right? It's a really strong sunlight, and so there's gonna be a lot of bounce light coming up from the ground or any other place that is getting hit by this light source. And so I want to be able to fake this bounce light as much as possible, not go too crazy with it, because I don't want it to compete with the main light, but I still want to show a little bit of that bounce light in there. I'm treating almost everything to go with the roundness and the cylindrical form of this building. I think that's going to be a good theme for this particular building, just to have everything sort of like bent. And so like if I was actually standing in front of this building or going into the building, everything that I say sort of have this sort of like curvature into it. And that way I can create some sort of theme around the actual building. And so I'm also using the base model here just to kind of have that darkness inside the building. Sometimes when you're creating these, especially if you have like just a section of the building, and if you have like windows or openings or anything like that, a lot of times you don't want to be able to look inside. because it's gonna look just plain empty. And so I'm using the base model here just to kind of give me that look as well. And here, just working the ground a little bit. I'm using this stone just to kind of create maybe like a pathway or something. I know that in Photoshop, I'm gonna work the ground way more than what I'm gonna do here in the 3D. And so a lot of times when I'm working this set of 3D concepts using Kitbash, I have in my mind already, okay, I'm gonna do this, this, and that on the Photoshop, so I don't have to worry about it in the 3D, because I know it takes me less time to do it on Photoshop. It's just a lot more simple than to try and fix it up into the 3D. Now I'm at the point where I'm just adding smaller details all around. I have the very basic big shape of the building, the medium shapes, and a lot of the small shapes that I'm getting in the buildings are already there. So now it's just really a matter of, okay, what are the things that maybe I can add around that will sort of enhance the actual concept of this, and then start adding them into it. And I'm not gonna go too crazy, because again, I know that I have work to do on Photoshop. But little by little, I started experimenting with things and adding little things here and there just to kind of push the boundaries of the design and the things that I think could work for the actual architecture. Now, a lot of these assets, especially a very singular assets, right? This is another reason why I love this process, is because you can give them many different purposes, right? So we have this sort of symbol here, which we use for naming for architecture. And I'm sort of thinking that maybe I could use it to create the actual handles of this door. And so I sort of combine them in many different ways, create this sort of like layering metal type of effect into it. And yeah, I can use it for architecture the way you're seeing it here. But you can also, grab all these different assets and just give them and use creative ways to give them different functions into your design, which I think is super powerful, right? And it's also a good habit or good practice for you to think outside the box and think outside of the actual purpose of this, and give it a new meaning. Now, I was already sort of like ready to render this, and I was looking at the first layer of roof on the first floor, and we have this other texture for roof here that I thought maybe I could play with it and give it just a little bit of more dimension to it. And so since I was in schedule, I was probably 1 hour 20 minutes in, or 1 hour 10 minutes into this. At this point, I decided to try this new roof here, just because I could add just another layer of detail if I extruded the shape of this tiles into here. The other one was feeling a little bit flatter, and this was one of those experiments that I wanted to try just to kind of see if it would work. I knew it wasn't going to take me a long time, and I knew that if it was going to work, it was just going to look just a little bit better. And so I'm trying different scales here for the tile and trying to play with the arrangement of this and the texture. I still like the sort of like lighter value of it in terms of the texture. So I wanted to keep that. And so I'll play with that later, but I wanted to make sure that this whole roofing system will actually work into the building that I'm building. And again, this is sort of like an extra step that I'm doing here, extruding a little just to give it a little bit of more dimension to this plane, because this is really what it is. It's just a plane. And so doing this, which is a very simple method, I can add just sort of like an extra level of detail into this, and that way I can make it look just a little bit better. And so I explore with that with that idea, and I ended up keeping it just because it added just an extra level of detail into this. Now, for the Photoshop section of this, I sort of always use the same process for this when I do stuff like this, but I wanted to bring some textures into the model just to kind of break up a little bit of that 3D-ness that I'm getting from the render. And this first part was actually a happy accident where I imported this texture just to kind of give a little bit of a structural um, destruction or wear and tear on the structures, but it gave me these sort of cracks into the buildings that I thought on the roof that I thought it was pretty cool to have, and so it was like a little happy accident that I sort of decided to keep into the image here. And you're gonna see that I'm pretty much using the same texture all throughout because it's really not that important about which photo you're using. It's just the actual effect that you're getting from the photo. And so if one photo does the job right, I'm gonna duplicate it, move it around, and put it into different places. And that way I can add that sort of wear and tear that makes this or make the building sort of have the look of being in use, right? That time has passed and people have been through here and or weather or anything that is nature related. And so we can sort of sell the idea even further that this is a believable building by adding those wear and tear into the structure themselves. Right. So I'm cutting a little bit of that cloth, making it not perfect. I'm also adding a new layer of just paint, just to kind of add more imperfections to the render, right? Because the render is so perfect in terms of like the edges and everything that is related to the architecture. And so during this process, I want to bring back or I want to cut some of that perfection and I want to bring some of the imperfections and things that will make this building more relatable. And again, this is a couple, there's a couple of things that I do, but they're also repeated processes, right? So I work with a little bit of picture just to add some grunge into the structure. I have a layer that I paint on top. I'm painting flowers or anything that I need to paint on. And I have other layers for photo bashing, which in this case I will use on the ground level for me to add that level of detail into it. And so right now the ground looks a little bit flat. And comparison to the building, we need to bring it up a little bit just so everything is a little more cohesive. And with lighting like this where you have a really strong sunlight, I always like to have a color dodge layer and just have that extra saturated section between the light and shadow, just so I can bring a little bit of warmth into the lighting. And so that way we also have a little bit of variation of color and saturation in the structure itself because of the lighting that we're having. Now I'm using these pictures just to kind of add again a little bit of variation. I don't want to go too overboard with this method, just because I don't want it to feel too photo bashy or too realistic, quote unquote, in terms of the rendering style. And so sometimes I blur the images or I paint over them with a texture brush or something like that. And a lot of time these images, I select them based on their value structure. And for example, this one here, I'm using the line because I like the shape that I'm getting on the lighter values of the material. And so putting it on lining will allow me to just have that section, which sort of creates this sort of path into the building. And so a lot of times when I choose these images, I look at the value structure and say, okay, the dark parts here are pretty cool, or the light parts here are pretty cool. And that way I can just use that to my advantage in order for me to add that detail into it. Now, I wasn't planning on having a whole background and making this whole same thing. I still want to keep it as simple as possible. But when I added this image, I thought that it could add just a little bit more of context to the environment, and without losing the focus on the actual architecture. So we have come to the final image again. You know, this process again, you can see how easy and how fast and efficient could be when you create these sort of assets in here. Now I want to remind you again that we have this free sample kit, that the same one that I use in order to create this, completely free, and I will put the link into the description for you to download. And if you want to be part of the contest or challenge, feel free to download it and join us for this month. Again, the deadline is on July 30th, and I will really love to see what you guys create. But I really hope that this gives you sort of like an idea of what you can do and the capabilities of this process. I hope that you guys learn something from it. And if you have any questions about this, like, feel free to put them in the comment section below, or shoot them up on the Discord community as well. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.